A History of Us by Joy Hakim.
Chapter 38 Connecticut, New Hampshire, and Maine. No one is ever all bad or all good. The witch trials may have been a low point for the Puritans, but mostly these were good, strong, intelligent people. If they hadn't been, they never would have crossed the ocean. They would have stayed in England, as most English people did, even when they didn't like the way they were ruled. Because the Puritans were independent thinkers, they sometimes disagreed with each other. When they did, there was plenty of room in America. They could just start a new settlement. Thomas Hooker was minister in a little town near Boston when, in 1636, he decided to move west. 100 of his followers went with him. He went to the beautiful valley of the Connecticut River. Today, no one is quite sure if he moved because of religious disagreements or because the valley was fertile and farming was easier than in rocky Massachusetts. He found good farmland and he was free to preach as he wished. Hooker had no charter when he arrived in Connecticut. The king hadn't given him permission to be there. He moved in anyway. He had no legal right to the land in the eyes of the English, and certainly none in the eyes of the Native Americans. So the Connecticut settlers sent their governor, John Winthrop II, to England to get a charter. When he went to see King Charles II, Winthrop wore a handsome ring that had belonged to Anne of Denmark, who happened to be Charles' grandmother. Winthrop gave the ring to Charles. The king, naturally, was delighted to have his grandmother's ring. Connecticut got a charter. The land it granted stretched as far west as the Pacific Ocean, although no one knew how far that was. Soon, Puritans were heading straight for Connecticut. Massachusetts was getting crowded, and the land in Connecticut was inviting. A group settled at New Haven in 1638 and another at New London in 1646. Each town had its own minister. The New Haven colonists published a list of laws that said how you were to behave. One law said, every male shall have his hair cut round. Another said, married persons must live together or be imprisoned. In 1639, the settlers in the Connecticut River Colony had an open meeting in which they drafted a groundbreaking document known as the Fundamental Orders. It was a constitution establishing a democratic state controlled by substantial citizens. While all this was going on, some people were moving north. The king had given a big piece of northern land to two friends, John Mason and Ferdinando Gorges. They divided that land, Gorges taking what became Maine and Mason taking New Hampshire. Mason and Gorges advertised for settlers in England, and people came. At first, New Hampshire was part of Massachusetts, with John Mason as its proprietor. Then it became a separate colony. Finally, the king took it back and held it himself as a royal colony. Maine was never a separate colony. It was part of Massachusetts until 1820, when it became the 23rd state. As soon as colonies were established, they began competing for good land and good people. The more people who came, the more land they needed. The big losers in this contest were the Indians. Serious colonization could not take place until the Indians had been pushed off the land, and pushed off they would be. Land greed. In Europe, only the really wealthy, the aristocrats, could own land. Ordinary people didn't even dream of their own land. In America, The land was so vast it would take the Europeans more than 200 years just to know how much there was. For a very long time, almost every free person who came to America could afford land. Almost as soon as the European Americans got land, they became greedy for more, and they wanted to change the land as Europe's land had been changed. They looked at the beautiful forests and saw an enemy that needed conquering. They cut down trees, leveled hills, filled in swamps, and killed animals and birds. They didn't understand how to work with nature, as the Indians often did. They forced nature to conform to their ways and wants. It turned out that the land wasn't endless, as they seemed to think at first. One day it would almost all be tamed. Then they would wish for some of those thick forests, some of those songbirds, some of the native animals. There would be few of them left. The Indians didn't accept the European idea of land ownership. Their religions taught them that the land and waters and animals belonged to God. They thought land could only be shared, not owned. So at first, when they signed treaties selling land, they thought they were selling the right to share it. They didn't expect to be ordered off the land. Their beliefs told them to live in harmony with nature. Land was to be used by a tribe as a whole, not owned by individuals. It was a way of looking at the land that did away with most greed, but not all greed. Tribes often fought each other for control of the use of land. Of course, if large numbers of people were to live on the land, it had to be changed. Millions and millions of people can't live in a forest. Cities were needed for all the people who would come to live on this bountiful land. And so we built cities and suburbs, and in the process, often polluted and burned and destroyed. Did we have to do that? Can we have cities and also sheltering woodlands and clean rivers and abundant wildlife? Yes, but it isn't easy. We have to care about our environment. We have to respect the natural world.
Pictures and sidebars.
The name Connecticut comes from the Mohican word Connecticut, meaning at the long tidal river. Connecticut settlers sent their governor to England to request a charter from King Charles II. The four New England colonies share a cold climate and limited farmland. Most settlers in New England were Puritans who built towns near rivers or the sea. The settlement of Dover, New Hampshire, in 1623. John Mason named New Hampshire after the county of Hampshire, which is on England's south coast. Europeans and Native Americans looked at the land in very different ways.